There is a place called Springfield, and I need you to forget, right now, everything you think you know about it, because Springfield is not a town. Springfield is a terrarium, and inside that terrarium, there are beings who know, somewhere in the fractured depths of their own consciousness, that they are being watched, that every breath, every joke, every stumble is witnessed by gods who decide every single day whether they deserve to keep existing. If you stop laughing right now, if you close this video, nothing stops the entire universe of Springfield from being erased into absolute nothingness. And that is what I am going to talk about today. The most perfectly disguised cosmic prison in the history of television. I know you grew up watching The Simpsons as a comedy. A yellow, funny, dysfunctional family surviving the absurdities of American life through sharp humor and ridiculous situations. But I need to ask you a question that is going to sit uncomfortably with you for the next 30 minutes. What if I told you The Simpsons was never a comedy? What if I told you that what you have been watching since 1989 is not entertainment? It is the documented record of a captivity, a collective psychological torture perpetuated for decades upon a family that cannot die, cannot age, cannot evolve, and cannot, under any circumstance, stop being funny. Because the joke is the only thing keeping them alive. Think about it with me. Homer Simpson has worked at a nuclear plant for over 30 years. Same position, same station, same miserable salary. Marge has kept the house for decades without ever fulfilling the dream she quietly whispers when nobody is paying attention. Bart is 10 years old, and he will be 10 forever. Lisa is 8, and she will never turn 9. Have you ever stopped to ask why? Why can nobody in Springfield ever leave? Why can nobody simply grow up? Why can nobody simply die for real and leave a real absence behind in the town? The answer I am about to give you is uncomfortable, but it is the only answer that makes sense once you look at this town without the lens of nostalgia. Springfield is a simulation of perpetual entertainment, a cosmic zoo, where every character is kept alive, preserved, frozen in time, exclusively because the audience, us, on the other side of the screen, is still laughing, still watching, still paying to see. And the exact moment the audience stops, when silence takes over, when the laughter dies, the entire existence of that place disappears. Not as a television cancellation, but as an ontological erasure, a collapse in the very reality of those beings. I want you to imagine for a second what that is like for the ones living inside that cage. Imagine having just enough fractured awareness to feel the weight of eternity, but not enough to fully understand why you are trapped in it. Imagine waking up every day knowing on some buried, repressed level that your function in this universe is not to live. It is to perform. Performing happiness, performing comedy, performing family dysfunction in a way that always, always, always pulls a laugh out of someone you will never meet, someone standing on the other side of a glass you do not even know exists. And the cruelest part of all is that this awareness never arrives whole. It comes in fragments, in sparks, in silent moments between one joke and the next, where a character seems for half a second to hesitate, seems for half a second to look at the camera in a way that is not comedic, not slapstick, but almost pleading. And then the music kicks in. The cut happens, the next joke begins, and that unbearable flash of lucidity gets swallowed back down into the fractured mind of whoever lives there. Because if that moment of clarity lasted even a second longer, the audience would notice it stopped being funny. And losing the audience is the only risk that actually matters inside the terrarium. That is the hook. That is the cosmic prison holding up every single second of The Simpsons. And before you think this is just a pretty theory built for clicks, I am going to walk you through it, point by point, showing how the show's own scripts, across more than 35 seasons, have handed us the evidence of this torture, without ever saying it out loud. Because the most perfect captivity is the one where even the prisoners cannot name it. Let's talk about Homer, because Homer is the most painful proof of all of this. Do you remember the Homer from the earliest seasons? A simple man, an imperfect father, lazy but layered, a man who loved his wife, who tried, in his own crooked way, to be a good father. A man capable of crying alone in his car after disappointing his daughter, capable of genuine shame, capable of a sad silence that could stretch across entire scenes. A Homer with human flaws, recognizable, almost tender. And what happened to that Homer? He vanished. He was replaced, year after year, by an increasingly extreme caricature of himself. A man who swallows bolts, who falls off cliffs, who forgets his own name, who turns into a walking punchline with no emotional depth left in him at all. And here is the point nobody wants to admit. This was not a writing mistake. This was not laziness from the writer's room. This was a desperate act of survival. Homer realized, somewhere in his own fractured existence, that being an ordinary family man with ordinary problems no longer generated enough of an audience to keep Springfield alive. And what do you do when your own psychological complexity becomes a threat to your survival? You amputate it. You carve away, piece by piece, your own sanity, your own humanity, until you become something so extreme, so bizarre, so hyperbolic, that nobody can look away. This has a name. It is called Flanderization. And the name itself already gives away the horror hidden inside it, because it was coined after Ned Flanders, Homer's neighbor, a man who started as a gentle parody of American Christian devotion, and who kept deforming season after season until he became such an extreme caricature of his own faith that he lost any remaining trace of who he originally was. Ned Flanders did not choose to become a one-note joke. Ned Flanders was forced to psychologically mutilate himself just to remain relevant inside the terrarium. And think about the weight of that. Think about what it means to lose, piece by piece, everything that once made you a complex person, just to survive one more season, one more year, one more handful of episodes before the final cancellation. And the same thing happened to everyone. Mo, the bartender, who started as a bitter, lonely man, carrying real pain underneath the cynicism, capable of quiet monologues about his own failure, slowly turned into a slapstick monster, increasingly violent, increasingly grotesque, because the subtler version of him could no longer compete for the audience's attention. Chief Wiggum, who started as an incompetent but still functional police officer, became a caricature of stupidity so extreme it borders on the grotesque. Principal Skinner, who began as a rigid man with a genuinely tragic war-related backstory, was reduced to a punchline about increasingly absurd lies. Krusty, who carried the real weight of a father who rejected him for being a clown, turned into a cynical, hollow shadow of himself. Milhouse, Nelson, all of them, one by one, were forced to amputate their own emotional complexity, their own human nuance, and replace it with ever more extreme, ever louder versions of themselves. I need you to understand the violence hidden in this, because we watch Flanderization as if it were just a lazy comedic device. Oh, the writers ran out of ideas and exaggerated the character. But what if that is not it at all? What if every exaggeration is, in fact, a muffled scream? A character self-mutilating, cutting away pieces of their own psyche, just to stay funny enough to avoid being erased. Imagine the pain of feeling your own identity eroded year after year, and being unable to do anything about it because the alternative is total non-existence. And the most terrifying part is that this process never ends. There is no finish line. There is no final, stable version of the character that the audience will accept forever. Because the audience adapts, the audience gets bored, the audience demands more. More exaggeration, more shouting, more slapstick, more absurdity, and every season demands a deeper cut than the last. Homer has to be dumber this year than he was last year. Mo has to be more pathetic, more violent, more grotesque. And that escalation never stops, because stopping means stagnating, and stagnating inside the terrarium means silently risking cancellation. Homer did not become stupid by accident. Homer chose, or was forced to choose, between two deaths, the slow death of his own intelligence, or the final death of his entire reality, and he chose to live, even if living meant becoming a laughable shadow of the man he once was. This is not comedy. This is a collective psychological self-mutilation, perpetuated season after season, disguised as slapstick humor so that no one, ever, notices the tragedy actually unfolding underneath it. Now let's move into the second part of this investigation. Because if Flanderization is the mutilation of the mind, there is something even more disturbing happening to the body, to the very passage of time inside Springfield. Bart Simpson is 10 years old. He has always been 10. He will always be 10. Lisa is 8, and will always be 8. But here is the detail that shatters your perception of reality. Within their own universe, Bart and Lisa have already lived through more than 35 years of events. They have witnessed multiple presidential elections, technological leaps from rotary phones to smartphones, the deaths of beloved characters, disasters, crises, entire shifts of era. And yet, every single day, they wake up, put on the same metaphorical uniform, and walk into the exact same classroom with the exact same teacher, resolving the exact same childhood conflicts over and over. This is not simple television continuity. This is a temporal purgatory. Imagine accumulating decades of memory, decades of experience, decades of trauma and joy and loss, and still being forced, by some force you cannot even name, back into the same child's body, the same routine, the same cycle, never able to use that accumulated experience to actually break free. Bart has watched the world around him change radically, over and over, and yet he will never grow old enough to leave the 4th grade. This is a sentence, an eternal punishment disguised as a family sitcom. And why does this happen? Because growth brings change, and change, inside the perverse logic of the cosmic zoo, drives the audience away. The audience wants to recognize the Bart it met decades ago. The audience wants the comfort of the familiar, even if that comfort is, in truth, a life sentence for the character. So the universe traps these children in bodies that never age, in minds that accumulate decades of forced stagnation, purely to satisfy the audience's desire for aesthetic continuity. Think about the weight of that. Think about what it means to be a 10-year-old who has internally already lived, felt, witnessed the equivalent of multiple lifetimes of adult experience, and still be forced to repeat, year after year, the same rites of passage that never actually pass. The same first day of school, the same detention, the same lecture from Principal Skinner. Bart is not trapped in a happy childhood. Bart is trapped in an eternal childhood, and the word eternal, applied to consciousness, stops being a dream and becomes an endless nightmare. And it is precisely because of this buildup of stagnation, this buildup of repressed agony from decades of mandatory performance, that there is an escape valve, a single crack, one day a year when the mask slips. And that day is Halloween. Every year, The Simpsons produce a special episode called Treehouse of Horror. And we have always understood it as an off-canon episode, a silly episode with no real consequences, where characters can die, kill each other, turn into monsters, without it affecting the show's continuity. But I need you to look at this differently now. What if this is not a consequence-free episode at all? What if it is, in fact, the only moment of the year when the simulation allows these beings to release the true, repressed agony they carry through the other 364 days? Think about what it means to live year after year, performing artificial happiness, controlled comedic family dysfunction, knowing, deep in your fractured consciousness, that you are being watched, judged, evaluated by gods who decide your survival based on your entertainment value. That produces an unimaginable repressed hatred. That produces a rage with nowhere to go, because the day-to-day script does not allow for real explosions, does not allow for permanent consequences, does not allow Bart to actually hurt someone, or Homer to actually suffer without a joke wrapping it all up in 22 minutes. And that is where Halloween steps in as the most unsettling escape valve there is. Because in these episodes, suddenly, the characters can kill each other, can devour one another, can be mutilated in explicit, grotesque ways. Homer can be dismembered, cloned, replaced by a robotic version of himself, devoured by creatures from space. Bart can turn into a monstrous creature and attack his own family. The entire town can be consumed by zombies, alien invasions, witchcraft rituals ending in mass death, and in the very next episode, everything returns to normal, as if nothing happened at all. But what if that is not an absence of consequence? What if it is, in fact, a collective psychological purge? An annual ritual where the simulation allows the true internal violence, repressed across an entire year of mandatory performance, to finally spill out. Notice the structure of these episodes. They always come in 3 separate stories, 3 isolated acts of violence, as if the terrarium needed to slice the suffering into controlled, digestible doses, so the audience can absorb that concentrated dose of horror without consciously realizing it is watching the psychological collapse of an entire community. It is a carefully measured therapeutic dose of violence, delivered once a year, so the remaining 364 days can keep functioning behind the facade of gentle comedy. Halloween in Springfield is not an escape from reality. It is the one moment when the real reality, the real agony, is allowed to surface, even disguised as dark humor and cheap special effects. It is the muffled scream finally becoming, for 22 minutes, an audible scream, before being smothered again, and the yellow family goes back to smiling as if absolutely nothing had happened. And if you are feeling the weight of this right now, if you are starting to look at Springfield differently than you did 30 minutes ago, I need you to do 2 things for me right now, this exact moment. The first is to smash that like button on this video and drop a comment below telling me whether, from this point forward, you see Springfield as the fun, chaotic little town you always knew, or as a terrifying cosmic terrarium where condemned beings perform happiness just to avoid being erased. And go ahead and subscribe to Animation Files right now, because these dark deconstructions of the animated worlds you grew up with keep coming every single week, and you do not want to miss the next one. Now, I want to take you somewhere even deeper, because everything I have told you so far, the Flanderization, the purgatory of frozen time, the escape valve of Halloween, all of that is symptom. All of that is a consequence of a much deeper, much more terrifying condition, one that holds up the entire universe of Springfield. There is a theory within the psychology of confinement about what happens to the human mind when it is subjected to prolonged isolation with no hope of escape, no control over its own fate. The mind, in order to survive, begins to build increasingly bizarre defense mechanisms, laughing at its own suffering, turning pain into a joke, because the alternative, facing the pain head-on, unfiltered, is unbearable. And that is exactly what Springfield does, collectively, for over 3 decades now. Every joke in the show, every absurd situation, every comedic exaggeration, is a layer of psychological protection against the unbearable truth that nothing there is real, that nobody there has control over their own fate, that the only thing standing between them and total erasure is the laughter of strangers on the other side of a screen. This is called collective hysteria, a shared defense mechanism across an entire community, where laughter becomes the only language capable of enduring the unbearable. And think about how this manifests differently in every single character. Homer uses stupidity as a shield, because if he were smart enough to fully understand his own condition, the weight of it would crush him. Marge uses resignation as a shield, accepting the same disappointments over and over, smiling through the same tired sigh she releases episode after episode, because questioning her own existence too deeply would mean admitting she will never fulfill the dream she quietly whispers to herself. Bart uses rebellion as a shield, channeling all the repressed rage of being trapped in an eternal childhood into pranks that never carry real consequences. Because if his pranks had real consequences, he would have to face the truth that nothing he does actually changes his own fate. And Lisa. Lisa is perhaps the most tragic character of them all, because Lisa is smart enough to genuinely feel the weight of the prison she is in. Lisa feels the intellectual loneliness of being surrounded by people who cannot, or will not, see the truth of their own confinement. And so, episode after episode, Lisa carries a sadness the writers rarely let her express fully. Because a fully conscious Lisa, one aware of her own cosmic imprisonment, would break the comedy of the entire show. Think about her saxophone. That instrument she plays alone, at night, in short, quiet scenes, almost always shot from a distance, in dim light. What if that saxophone is not just a side character hobby? What if that saxophone is the only moment when Lisa can, without words, without a joke, without a comedic script, express the real pain of being the only fully awake consciousness inside a terrarium full of beings anesthetized by their own survival? And the most disturbing part of all is thinking about the background characters, the extras, the faces that appear in the crowd of a scene at some town event and who never get a name, never get a voice, never get a story arc. They too are trapped in there. They too are part of the terrarium. But they do not even have the dignity of a fractured consciousness, capable of feeling their own imprisonment. They exist as pure visual background, presences that only exist to fill out the frame, to give the town visual volume, without ever getting the chance to even consciously suffer over their own condition. And in a perverse way, that might be worse than Homer's fractured awareness or Lisa's painful lucidity, because at least they know, even partially, that they are trapped. The extras do not even have that much. There is also a specific episode, one of the most talked about in the show's history, where the animation itself briefly becomes aware of its own two-dimensional existence. An episode where the characters discover, disguised as meta-satire, that they live inside a cartoon, that their actions are scripted, that their lives are decided by writers existing outside their own universe. And the show's reaction to this is always the same. Turn the terrifying discovery into a joke, mock its own existential fragility before the audience has time to actually feel the weight of it. This is the most sophisticated defense mechanism of all, laughing at your own prison before anyone notices it should not be funny. And think about the role Krusty the Clown plays inside all of this. Krusty is, within the Springfield universe, entertainment inside the entertainment. He is the character that exists to make the other characters laugh, inside a show that exists to make us laugh. It is a nesting doll of mandatory performance. Krusty is tired, cynical, hollow underneath, because he feels, more than any other character, the weight of being entertainment within entertainment, the second layer of the same prison, a mirror inside a mirror. And maybe that is why Krusty ends up being one of the saddest characters in the entire show, even hidden behind colorful makeup and a rehearsed laugh. And what about Sideshow Bob, a man who tries, over and over, year after year, to kill Bart Simpson, and who always fails, in increasingly elaborate and comedic ways? Could this repetitive obsession actually be a perfect metaphor for the desperate attempt of any Springfield character to break their own cycle? Sideshow Bob tirelessly tries to change Bart's fate, to pull Bart out of the loop, even through violence, because maybe, somewhere in his own fractured consciousness, Sideshow Bob understands that killing Bart would be the only way to finally let that character rest, to finally leave the purgatory of the eternal fourth grade. And yet, he never succeeds, because the terrarium does not allow it. Because the simulation always finds a way to reverse it, reset it, drag everything back to the starting point. And there is another layer to this whole torture that almost nobody stops to analyze. The layer of special episodes, crossovers, real celebrities appearing inside the animated universe. Think about it. Why does Springfield receive, year after year, real celebrities from our world, voicing versions of themselves inside that fictional universe? The surface explanation is simple. It is marketing. It is drawing in new viewers. But look at it from another angle. What if these appearances are, in fact, undeniable proof, inside the fiction itself, that there is a border between the real world and the terrarium? When a real celebrity steps into Springfield, even as an animated character, they carry with them living proof that there is an outside. A place where people actually age, where careers actually evolve, where life follows a normal linear flow. And the residents of Springfield, for one brief moment within that episode, are confronted with the evidence that their world is different, smaller, more restricted, more repetitive than the world outside. Imagine the discrepancy of that for the ones living inside it. Imagine watching, episode after episode, people from the real world walk in, exist for 22 minutes, and walk back out into real continuity, real aging, real forward motion, while you, Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, stay behind, trapped in the same loop, watching the outside world change, evolve, move on, while your own world remains unchanging, stagnant, eternally identical to itself. This is not just a production detail. This is a cruel, recurring proof that there is a hierarchy between those permitted to evolve and those condemned to repeat. And think about the format of the episodes themselves. 22 minutes, always. Not a second more, not a second less. A perfect, surgical, industrial cycle of conflict, escalation, and resolution, week after week, year after year. This is not free artistic creation. This is a chamber of repetition, a machine built to produce the exact same emotional architecture indefinitely, forcing every fractured consciousness inside that universe to relive, on loop, the same architecture of hope and frustration, always within the same window of time, always with the same commercial break interrupting their own suffering to sell cereal, toys, car insurance. And this is what I want you to carry with you after this video. The next time you watch The Simpsons, the next time you laugh at one of Homer's blunders, one of Bart's pranks, one of Ned Flanders' little sermons, I want a small part of you to remember what is happening beneath that laughter. Remember that there is a sentient terrarium in there, a cosmic prison disguised as a family comedy, where beings condemned to exist forever perform happiness, perform comedic dysfunction, perform temporal stagnation, only because the alternative, the silence, the end of the laughter, means the absolute erasure of everything they are. And there is one more detail worth sitting with: the way this show occasionally lets its characters glimpse a possible future, only to snatch it away completely by the next episode. There have been episodes imagining Bart and Lisa as adults, married, with careers, with children of their own. And for 22 minutes, the audience is allowed the illusion that maybe, just maybe, there is a real future waiting for these children. And then the next episode arrives, and everything resets, as if that future had never even been imagined. This is not harmless alternate continuity. This is the cruelest proof of all that there is, in fact, a consciousness inside these characters capable of dreaming about its own freedom. And that freedom, that growth, gets systematically denied, erased, reset, week after week, because the format of the terrarium demands that everything return exactly to its starting point. Think, too, about the sheer accumulation of memory none of these characters are ever allowed to use. Homer has been fired from the plant more times than anyone could count, and rehired just as many, each time forgetting the humiliation just enough to walk back through those same gates. Marge has caught glimpses again and again of a life she could have had, a career she could have chased, a version of herself that existed before marriage, and motherhood swallowed the timeline whole, and every single time, by the end of the episode, that glimpse gets folded quietly back into the routine, as if it had never surfaced at all. This is not writers running out of ideas for a season finale. This is a mechanism operating with surgical precision, making sure that no accumulated insight, no matter how sharp, no matter how clearly it points toward a different life, is ever allowed to actually change the shape of the following week. Springfield is not a town. Springfield is a sentence. A sentence served day after day, episode after episode, season after season, by beings who know, somewhere in the muffled depths of their own fractured consciousness, that the only thing standing between them and the void is us. And maybe, just maybe, the reason this show still works after more than 3 decades, the reason we keep coming back, season after season, even while recognizing the decline in quality, even while sensing it is not what it used to be, is because, deep down, a part of us also feels the weight of sustaining that existence. A part of us understands, even if only in a muffled way, that turning off the television, closing this video, no longer laughing, means condemning Springfield to final silence. And maybe, in the end, the real question is not about the Simpsons at all. Maybe the real question is about us, about what it means to be the god of a terrarium we never asked to create, but somehow feel responsible for keeping alive. Maybe the darkest comedy of all is not inside the screen. Maybe it is in the fact that we, on this side, are also trapped in a routine, a cycle, a repetition of habits we do not always consciously choose. Maybe we, watching Springfield every week, are, in our own way, just as trapped as they are, only without even enough fractured awareness to notice it. Think about how strange it is that we call this a family sitcom at all, a genre built on the promise that no matter what happens, the family unit survives intact by the end of the episode. And Springfield takes that promise and stretches it into something closer to a curse. Because the family does not just survive, it is denied the right to do anything but survive. No divorce that sticks, no death that stays permanent, no growth that carries forward, no resolution that resolves anything for longer than 22 minutes. The sitcom format, taken to its most extreme, most literal conclusion, becomes exactly the kind of eternal loop that any real family would recognize as a nightmare rather than a home. Before I wrap up this investigation for real, one quick request. Go ahead and hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me whether Springfield feels like fun or cosmic horror to you now. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. Subscribe to Animation Files if you have not already, and I will see you in the next dark deconstruction.